touch on what you mentioned there about how girls need to follow a program and stick with it and kind of not add in all these other workouts and jogs and circuits at home. So if they're working with a performance coach or doing some remote program, you can't deviate from that because there's just too many cooks in the kitchen. Your body's going to get confused and you're not going to be able to work toward that goal you want to reach, like speed or maybe better agility or strength and power. So let's talk about why it's so important to stay consistent with the performance program that you're on.
Yeah, I mean, I understand like a lot of parents will be like, well, what can my daughter do outside of here? She found a jump program online. She's doing that on top of the program that she's doing with you guys. And I always like to try to simplify it in that it's like you're trying to bake cookies, but you're following two different recipes at the same time. So one batch of cookies, and your cookies are not turning out well. And it's well because you're following two different recipes. You cannot follow two different recipes. You must follow one recipe. You can double that recipe and see what happens, but you cannot do a different recipe because two different recipes will end up not creating delicious cookies. So if you're that concerned that you need your athlete to do more because you feel as though she's not doing enough, you have to go to that initial recipe and say, hey, what can we do to add to this recipe to get me a bigger result, more cookies, a bigger yield? But going somewhere else to a different recipe book is going to lead to really crappy cookies. So you need to focus on having one recipe and sticking to that one recipe and committing to it and then seeing the result and then deciding if you want to try a different cookie, a different recipe. But if you try to hop and add so many different things, it's just not going to result the way that you want it because the body is really it's just like it's just like baking. It's the same thing. You have to tell your body, give it certain ingredients, um certain measurements at certain temperatures, and that's what's going to help your body develop and actually reach that goal. But if you try to do too many things at once, it ends up being too fatigued, and that's when you end up seeing either an injury or poor performance. And you're like, why isn't my speed gone up? I keep doing all these things, I'm running, I'm doing this. And it's like, well, it's because you're following too many different recipes. Follow one recipe, and if you feel the need to do more, go to that cook who wrote that recipe and say, is there anything I can add to this recipe that helps me get this recipe better?
I see that a lot with girls who maybe go for like a 3 mile run before like a high velocity day and they're wondering why they're like slowing down or their times are worse. And it's because they're fatigued from the day before. And I think it's just like making those expectations clear to everyone. Hey, if you're going to do some nonsense outside of this, then yeah, you can expect your performance in the facility or on the track to completely go down. And you're not going to get those incremental improvements over time.
Exactly. Exactly. We have an athlete, I actually just spoke to her dad, whose vertical jump just isn't, she's a volleyball player, isn't going up. We're like, why? I've been here. I'm like, well, typically when that happens, what's her recovery looking like outside of here? What's her sleep? What's her nutrition? Maybe we should talk about adding a day. And then to find out that she's actually like doing this whole additional other vertical jump program on her own, like all these plyometrics. And
Mhm.
she's doing it when she's like in season. And this last program she was on was like a complete month deload because she really has 1 month a year that we can just like decrease volume, decrease intensity, because we're seeing like she's not improving, her body's really fatigued. Let's get it to recover. Then to find out she's doing all this extra jumping, and that her knee is hurting again. And it's like it's the same conversation. It's just you're trying to follow way too many recipes at once. You have to trust the one recipe that you're on, because you can't have a science experiment and be like, oh, the science experiment has not turned out that I wanted to, but it's because you secretly added something else to the mix and you didn't tell the chemist. And they're like, well, why is this green? Like, why this isn't turning out the way I want to? So it's really the same process. Like, this athlete means well because she wants to get better. She absolutely wants to get better. But instead, I wish some of the feedback from the parent was more like, okay, should we go another day a week? Should we ask them if they can write something for us to do at home? We have access to weights at home, or should we focus on like what out, let's ask them what they recommend. And maybe they'd recommend, hey, this isn't the season to build your vertical. You're in season right now. You have an injury, a severe injury history. So let's make sure you're recovering. What's your sleep like? What's your nutrition like? Because then when we hit winter, then we can really start to drive the needle forward. There's just a season for everything, and you can't do it all at once.